The slap echoed off the 14-foot ceilings of my parents' dining room like a gunshot. 50 of Park City's wealthiest residents went absolutely silent. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. Conversations died. And I stood there 32 years old, cheek burning, watching a river of dark Cabernet spread across $12,000 worth of white silk. And I made a decision that would change every life in that room forever. My name is Indigo. And this is the night I stopped saving a family that had spent 2 decades treating me like a problem to be managed. Let me back up. Because what happened in that dining room didn't start with a spilled glass of wine. It started 20 years earlier, with a 16-year-old girl standing in a cold driveway, holding a plastic grocery bag stuffed with everything she was allowed to keep: 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and a photograph her grandmother had slipped into her pocket before the door closed. Her crime? Getting pregnant. Her punishment? Being erased from the family portrait. Literally and figuratively. That girl was me. But here's the thing about people who survive being thrown away at 16. We learn to be extraordinary at survival. I went on to build a quiet, competent life. I became a licensed emergency dispatcher, someone trained to stay controlled and methodical when the entire world is screaming. I raised my son on my own. And somewhere along the way, because I was capable and because I never stopped loving people who had stopped deserving it, I became the invisible engine that ran the Dawson family machine. I managed their digital accounts. I organized their legal paperwork. I cleaned up my sister Serafina's disasters with the kind of efficiency that would have impressed a crisis communications firm. And in return, I received a seat at the holiday table provided I arrived through the side entrance and left before the photographs were taken. For years, I told myself that was enough. I told myself proximity was the same as belonging. I was wrong. The night it all fell apart was Christmas Eve. The kind of Park City night where the cold has actual weight. Where the air bites through your coat the second you step outside. My parents' home was the most beautiful it ever looked in December. A 4-story limestone manor lit up like a movie set. Catered waitstaff moving through the rooms with surgical precision. I was carrying a tray of wine to a group of my father's business associates when one of the guests, visibly tipsy, 3 glasses deep since dinner, stumbled sideways and caught my arm. The tray tilted. The wine went airborne. And just like that, Serafina's limited edition holiday gown absorbed the entire bottle. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. Before the wine even finished dripping, my sister's hand connected with my face so hard the room went quiet. Not the polite, awkward quiet of social discomfort, the stunned, held breath quiet of people witnessing something that couldn't be unseen. She didn't glance at the guest who had actually caused the collision. She didn't ask if I was hurt. She screamed, genuinely screamed, asking if I was blind. I looked at my mother, Eleanor. I want to be honest about what I was hoping for in that moment. Not an apology. Not even a defense. Just acknowledgement. A single sentence that said, "I see you." Instead, she grabbed my arm and shoved me toward the foyer, her voice low and tight, telling me to apologize or get out. My father, Victor, didn't say a single word. He simply walked to the heavy oak front door, pulled it open, and held it. The message was clear. You are dismissed. I walked out into the Utah winter without an argument, without tears, and without a coat. I heard the door close behind me, and standing on that stone porch in the dark, I felt something I hadn't expected at all. Not humiliation. Not grief. Something that felt more like the eerie calm a pilot describes right before they execute an emergency landing. Complete focus. Zero emotion. Total clarity. They thought they were throwing out a nuisance. They had no idea they had just given me permission to stop protecting them. I drove 20 miles down the canyon before I pulled over. The rest stop was empty, except for a plow truck idling at the far end of the lot. I cut my engine, pulled my laptop from the back seat, and opened it in the dark. My cheek was still hot where Serafina's hand had landed. The screen light turned the frost on my windshield a pale, cold blue. Here's something Victor never understood about handing someone all of your passwords and access credentials. You are not giving them convenience. You are giving them keys. For 5 years, he had treated me as his unpaid digital administrator, forwarding me every login, every portal access, every account credential, because learning how technology worked was, apparently, beneath him. His master password, the one he used for everything, was still his own birthday. 1962. I typed it in. The Dawson Family Trust Management portal loaded in seconds. The trust held $3,200,000 in inheritance left directly to my son by his great-grandmother, Margaret Dawson, a woman who had been the only member of this family who ever made me feel like I belonged in it. Margaret had established the trust with a single condition. The funds were to be managed and preserved until my son turned 25. They were untouchable. Protected. His future, written into law by a woman who had loved him before he could speak. Except they weren't untouchable. Not anymore. What the dashboard showed me made my stomach drop into the floor of that car. The trust hadn't just been borrowed from the way a family might quietly justify a bad decision in a desperate moment. The assets had been systematically commingled with Victor's failing commercial real estate loans over a period of more than 18 months. My son's future had been used as a silent financial cushion to keep my parents' lifestyle inflated while their actual business collapsed underneath them. I sat completely still for a very long time. Then I opened my email archive and located a folder I had quietly been building for 7 months. A folder I had created, not because I planned to use it, but because I had learned early in life that documentation is the only form of security that doesn't expire. Inside it were pre-drafted legal notices, correspondence logs, and a formal notice of fiduciary breach I had prepared with the guidance of a probate attorney named Mr. Whitaker, a 75-year-old man who had handled my grandmother's original estate paperwork and who had gently warned me, on the day I first showed him my concerns, to keep records of everything. 3 clicks. That was all it took. I submitted the notice of fiduciary breach to the bank's compliance department at 12:47 inches the morning on Christmas Day. Because the trust was structurally tied to Victor's business credit lines, the bank's system did exactly what it was designed to do. It initiated an immediate administrative freeze across every account connected to the flagged entity. By the time the sun came up over the Wasatch Mountains, every credit card in the Dawson household would be a useless piece of laminated plastic. I closed my laptop. I sat in the dark for a while. Then I drove to a 24-hour diner, ordered the largest coffee on the menu, and started composing my thoughts for the morning. They didn't wait for morning to start the counterattack. By 2 a.m., my mother had already posted in the family's private Facebook group a lengthy, carefully worded account of the evening that described me as unstable, jealous, and the instigator of what she called an unprovoked attack on her daughter during a family celebration. The performance was impressive. She had tagged 12 relatives, included 3 photographs of the ruined gown, and framed the entire evening as an act of charity on their part after all. Hadn't they included me in the holiday dinner out of the goodness of their hearts? Serafina's texts arrived simultaneously. She didn't ask where I was. She didn't ask if I had somewhere warm to sleep. She sent a payment request for $5,000. The cost, she explained, of rush ordering a replacement gown for a partnership event she had the following weekend, and added that I was, in her estimation, lucky she wasn't pursuing legal action for emotional distress. I read both messages. I set my phone on the diner counter. I drank about half my coffee. Then I went back to my archived files and found something I had never intended to use. 2 years earlier, Serafina had crashed her luxury SUV on a canyon road at nearly twice the legal blood alcohol limit. She had called me from the scene, not 911. Me and I had spent 4 hours on the phone with every contact I had in the emergency response network, quietly managing the situation so that the responding officer documented it as a minor fender collision and the toxicology results disappeared into administrative process. I had saved her influencer career, her sponsorship contracts, and her driver's license in a single overnight operation. I had never asked for anything in return. I had never told anyone. I had simply filed the dashcam footage and the original incident report in a clearly labeled folder and moved on with my life. I posted a single message to the family group chat. A screenshot of that incident report. A photograph of the wine-stained dress. And 4 sentences. I told them that the invisible foundation of their life was stepping back. I reminded them of the night they handed a 16-year-old girl a grocery bag and called her pregnancy an embarrassment. I told them that everything they had built on top of my silence was about to meet the version of me that had stopped being silent. Then I closed the app, left a tip for the server, and drove to Whitaker's office. Mr. Whitaker met me at 8 a.m. He had the kind of face that had absorbed a lifetime of difficult conversations without losing its steadiness, and he listened without interrupting as I walked him through everything I had found in the trust portal the previous night. When he pulled up the digital scan of the bridge loan documentation, his hand stopped moving. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the signature authorizing the loan, a signature executed in my son's name, and then he looked at me. My son was 11 years old. Eleanor hadn't just spent the trust funds. She had forged a minor child's signature on a high-interest bridge loan to generate operating capital for their real estate business. That wasn't civil negligence. That was identity theft perpetrated against her own grandson. Whitaker told me, quietly and clearly, that once he submitted the formal challenge to the bank's compliance division and forwarded the forged documentation to the appropriate authorities, there was no version of this that ended quietly. The IRS, the bank's criminal investigations unit, and the state attorney's office would all have jurisdiction. There was no path back to a family dinner after this. He asked me twice if I was certain. I thought about the door my father had held open in silence. I told him to file it. I reported for my dispatch shift at midnight. It was the kind of shift where the mountains feel especially indifferent, clear, cold, utterly still. I had been on the headset for 4 hours when the call came in. A single vehicle accident on the canyon road. The cell tower hit mapped to a number I recognized immediately. Serafina. I picked up the line. My voice was the same measured, neutral tone I use for every caller, regardless of the circumstance. The voice I was trained to use. The voice that keeps people alive when they are panicking. She was screaming. In the background, I could hear the distinctive metallic hiss of a ruptured radiator, and what I identified as a sheared fire hydrant spraying against the undercarriage of the vehicle. She led with her name, then her father's name, then a demand for a discreet officer who could manage the situation privately. I asked her to state her emergency for the recorded line. I asked her to confirm her location. I walked her through the protocol calmly and completely. And in doing so, I gave her every opportunity to say anything she chose to say to a recording that was already running. What she said, in the frantic, exhausted honesty of genuine panic, was this. She had been on her banking app, trying to understand why her cards weren't working when she took the turn. She had been driving at 50 miles per hour on a mountain road at 2:30 in the morning, while operating her phone, and she said so freely, because she didn't know she was telling it to someone who understood exactly what those words meant on a formal incident record. Captain Miller, a 30-year veteran of the Park City Fire Marshal's office, and a man who had attended my grandmother's funeral, was first on scene. I watched his GPS icon arrive and hold position beside the flipped vehicle. He was not there to manage the family's reputation. He was there to do his job. I coordinated the response, documented the call record, and flagged it for the city attorney's review before my shift ended. Then I drove to the edge of my parents' cul-de-sac and waited for the sun. It came up cold and pale, the kind of Utah winter dawn that offers light without warmth. I sat in my car and watched two white government SUVs idle in the driveway of the mansion. Victor came out onto the porch in his silk robe. I had never seen him look small before. He was a broad-shouldered man, a man who filled a room with presence and expectation, but standing on that stone porch in the early morning light, holding a stack of civil seizure notices, he looked diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. He looked like someone who had finally been handed the bill for a meal he had been eating for decades. Eleanor followed. She wasn't carrying her handbag. She was carrying a plastic grocery bag, the kind you get from a gas station convenience store, stuffed with whatever she'd managed to grab before the court order locked the premises. I want to tell you honestly that I didn't feel triumphant in that moment. What I felt was much quieter than that. I felt the specific, wordless relief of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has finally been allowed to exhale. I rolled past the house slowly. Victor looked up and found my eyes through the windshield. I rolled the window down just enough to let the cold air in. I didn't say a word. I simply reached into the passenger seat, pulled out a single printed page, an itemized statement I'd pulled from the trust ledger, annotated with 20 years of compounding interest on every favor, every rescue, every unpaid hour, and let it fall into the snow at his feet. Then I drove away. The final legal outcome took 3 months to settle. Serafina was sentenced to 2 years in state prison on charges of reckless endangerment and insurance fraud, with a restitution order of $65,000 for the city infrastructure she'd destroyed. Victor and Eleanor avoided criminal prosecution on the forgery charges, a negotiated outcome their attorney managed in exchange for full cooperation with the IRS investigation. But the civil asset forfeiture was total. The Park City estate, both vehicles, and all investment accounts were absorbed by the state. My son's $3,200,000 trust was fully recovered and restructured into a locked heritage fund with independent legal oversight. Victor and Eleanor Dawson cannot touch a single cent of it. I received a letter from Eleanor 6 weeks after the forfeiture finalized. She wrote from a studio apartment in a town I'd never heard of. The letter didn't contain an apology. It didn't ask about her grandson. It informed me that she was still my mother, and that I had a moral obligation to help the family that had raised me. I read it once. Then I walked to the kitchen and fed it to the shredder. I want to say something about that moment, not about the anger, because the anger was gone by then, but about the indifference. The complete, clean, untroubled indifference I felt watching that paper disappear. I used to believe that indifference meant you had stopped caring about someone. I now understand it means something different. It means you've finally stopped expecting them to be something they were never going to be. It means you've put down a weight you didn't realize you were still carrying. That is the hardest kind of freedom to earn. My life now is quieter than I ever imagined a life could be. I still work dispatch. I will probably always work dispatch, because I genuinely believe that being the calm voice that helps someone find their way out of the worst moment of their life is one of the most honest ways I know to spend my time. But when I go home, I walk into a house that smells like lavender and safety and belongs entirely to me. I have friendships built on actual reciprocity rather than utility. I have a son who is growing up watching his mother choose herself, which I believe is the most important education I can give him. If you are someone who has ever been the person the family calls to fix things, the one who manages the chaos, absorbs the blame, and quietly holds everything together while being excluded from the celebration. I want you to hear this directly. You are not a resource. You are not a safety net. You are not the family's private crisis management department, operating on a budget of emotional manipulation and guilt. Competence is not the same as consent. Being good at solving someone's problems does not obligate you to continue solving them indefinitely, especially when the problem is the way they've chosen to treat you. Loyalty is not inherited through last names. It is built through consistent behavior over time, and it flows in both directions. Or it isn't loyalty, it's exploitation dressed up in the language of family obligation. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to document everything. You are allowed to let the consequences land on the people who earned them. I am Indigo. I am 32 years old. I worked every system they handed me. Their accounts, their credentials, their trust, and I used every single one of them to protect my son, restore my grandmother's legacy, and finally, permanently, close the door on a chapter of my life that had been trying to consume me since I was 16 years old. I did not blow up their lives out of rage. I rebuilt mine out of clarity, and for the first time in as long as I can remember, I am completely, irreversibly free.